Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another random review. As I like to keep up to date with films, today's random review comes from 1932, and it's the Frederic March version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, directed by Ruben Mamoulian, who is kind of underrated, even though he actually only made 17 films, co-starring Miriam Hopkins, who did some work with Lubitsch and was kind of a superstar in her own right in the early 30s. It's also Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, based on the famous story by Mr. Stevenson. There had been a silent version by Lon Chaney. On this disc is the 1941 version with Spencer Tracy and Ingrid Bergman and Lana Turner, directed by Victor Fleming of Wizard of Oz fame. But I'm going to talk about the Frederic March one. Now, Frederic March was actually only in his 30s when he made this. You're used to Frederic, or I'm used to Frederic March being, much older and stiff, and playing authority figures, whereas this is hungry little scientist wanting to explore the duality of man. But the story in the film is really about why premarital sex is probably a good thing, because he is gagging for it. He is betrothed or engaged to a young woman in high society, but her father wants an 8-month engagement, and obviously Frederic March's loins are burning for some horizontal jogging, so he wants to move the marriage up, but then she goes away with her father to try and persuade him, and Frederic March is left in London gagging for it. He comes across Miriam Hopkins, not literally, or maybe he does, who's being attacked, and he takes her in and helps her, and gives her a little smooching, as doctors did in those days to female patients with not many clothes on. But he delves himself into his work about the duality of man, to separate the beast side from the civilised side. Obviously we're talking London in the 30s, so the stiff upper lip, and Dr. Jekyll wants something else to be stiff. But what's wonderful about this film is the fact that in 1932, still weren't too that far away from the silence and the talkies. Sometimes they forgot to move the camera because they were so enamoured with the sound. But what strikes you, well, two things strike you about this film. It's 1932, so it is pre-code. So Miriam Hopkins is showing off cleavage in most of the film. There's even a scene where you can see the side of her naked torso. There's a scene where, when Dr. Jekyll leaves her after rescuing her from her pimp, basically, she is dangling her leg out of the bed, a naked leg, and swinging her naked leg. And even as Jekyll and his friend are going down the stairs outside, we get this superimposition of Miriam Hopkins' swinging naked leg, and the words, "Oh, come back and see me, come back and see me." I mean, the film is practically filth. It's practically pornography. So you can tell, I mean, if this was made in 1936, it would be a completely different film. There's almost smut in every frame. Dr. Jekyll talks about, wanting his fiancée and wanting her and having her. He's practically drooling, and then when he does become Mr. Hyde, he's literally slavering at the mouth with his rather pointy protruding teeth. The transformation was done in camera with makeup, and then pan away. But again, so the first thing is the pre-code sauciness and smuttiness of the film, with cleavage everywhere. Unbelievable. But the second thing is how Mamoulian uses the camera. It's kind of dazzling. The stunt work's fantastic. There's wonderful sets. There's points where Hyde is clambering up the walls of the laboratory. There's POV shots from Dr. Jekyll's perspective. The camera very rarely sits still. It's such a dynamic film, and you could argue, it looks more like something from the 40s or 50s rather than 1932. So it is almost breathtaking how much the camera is dynamic in the film, compared to, as I said, some films from that period are really quite stiff and the camera doesn't do much. But Mamoulian is using the camera as nature intended. I mean, obviously the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde story, you could say it's a kind of forerunner of the werewolf myth as far as man and the beast inside. It's a little bit of Frankenstein as well, as far as the crazy scientist playing God. And of course there's protestations later in the film by March for God to forgive him for playing God, and only God should play God, even though, to be fair, God shouldn't really play God either, like giving golf ball sized tumours to 4-year-olds on their kidneys and stuff. That's not a fun way of playing God anyway. So again, it's a moral film. Stay in your lane, don't push the envelope, especially when it comes to splitting the human personality, the id and the super id, the ego and the super ego. And it's also try and keep it in your pants until you're married. But literally Frederic March is struggling with that concept, and when he first changes into Mr. Hyde, it's literally, he screams, I'm free to actually get it on until dawn. So everybody's familiar with the story, but it's certainly been a while since I've seen this, and watching it again, as I said, it's a filthy film, and it's also a really dynamic film. It's 98 minutes long. It really flies by. So for example, the Spencer Tracy one is 113, so I'm guessing, because I haven't seen that one for years either, I'm guessing that one's got a bit more padding to it. But Mamoulian's film is very streamlined, very economic. And as I said, for people like myself who are used to Frederic March being establishment characters and being stiff and straight-backed, he's just having a ball when he becomes Mr. Hyde. Obviously it's a physical role, but even as Dr. Jekyll, there's a spring in his step, and he is full of energy. Granted, it's frustrated sexual energy, but it is great to see actual young Frederic March, and he does give a wonderful performance as the disintegration of Dr. Jekyll when the transformation, he can't actually control it. It was only when he took the bubbly juice. but later in the film his inner libido comes out, even when he doesn't want it to, and again he prays to God to say, oh, not now, but strangely enough God doesn't answer. It's almost as if he doesn't exist, or perhaps he was away on business at the time when Frederic March was turning into Mr. Hyde to go in and ravish his fiancée. Everybody else is obviously stiff upper lipped, but Miriam Hopkins is wonderful as the spunky streetwalker, and she has a great performance, especially when she's particularly terrified of Mr. Hyde. It's a wonderful little film, and I must say I had my doubts about this, DVD with 2 films on the one disc, no artwork, but the print of the 1932 version is really good, and it's actually a commentary on the 1932 version by film historian Greg Mank, and there's a Bugs Bunny Looney Tunes cartoon of Hyde and Hare, and there's a trailer for the 1941 versions. As I said, I haven't rewatched the Spencer Tracy one yet, Ingrid Bergman, but I shall do at some point. But I just wanted to talk about the Frederic March one, because it is so good. Again, at the time, obviously people had seen the Lon Chaney silent one, but it must have been fun for them seeing the Frederic March sound one, and Mamoulian directs the film with gusto, and wonderful camera movement, or a real sense of the Gothic, with wonderful set design, as I said, especially Dr. Jekyll's laboratory. So thanks so much for watching this random review. Please let me know if you've seen Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, if you're familiar with the story at all, and hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews. This is Solitary Ronan from Solitary Ronan Films, saying farewell